Just one second before we start. Are we addressing like the third person's perspective or just each other when we're like introducing?
Whatever, bro.
Okay. What? No, like
Do you want to be like? Do you want to be like? Hey, I'll be introducing myself. I'll be like, Yogi is a. Yogi
no,
is
not like that. Not like that. It's like
everywhere. Beep, 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 beep,
Yeah,
beep.
I mean, till now I didn't have that problem. Out of all the people, I'm the one who will have to worry about the most with that problem.
No, you gotta worry about me. I have to hold myself.
No problem. I don't have to leave that out. Maybe if it crosses a certain threshold, maybe yes.
Yeah. What's the threshold? 20 times. Just kidding.
20 times in a sentence, yeah. What's up, guys? Tejas here from 11 Gauge Recordings. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Creatives on Tap podcast. Today, we are in conversation with two of my peers, two amazing audio engineers, and two amazing musicians. Welcome, Yogendra Hari Prasad and Akash Shiv Kumar. What's up, guys?
what's up,
Thanks,
man?
Tejas, for having us.
Thank you for agreeing to do this. So let's for the guys listening or watching, let's do a small introduction. So if you can introduce yourselves for the podcast, please.
Akash, go ahead.
So hey guys, what's up? I am a freelance audio engineer and I play the guitars as well. And I'm not sure what else to explain here. So I handle both the live sound as well as Iono Studio, Cadence Recording Studios.
Yep.
So yeah, it's pretty
Right
much.
here in Bangalore.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
based out of Bangalore.
And you can also mention the band that you play for.
Oh yeah.
You want to.
Okay. So at the moment, I'm currently active with two artists. One is Brother V, the hip hop artist from Bangalore, and this other band called My Conscience, which is like the brainchild of singer-songwriter Karthik Chenoji Rao, who's also the singer of Pineapple Express.
Yeah.
One of the vocalists of Pineapple Express, I should say.
Nice. Cool. Yogi.
My name's Yogi, which is short for Yogendra Hari Prasad. So
Yeah. I did the entire.
Long as hell. I am a producer, music composer, arranger. I sing, I play the keyboard, and I do sound, both studio and live. I play for my band Pineapple Express, and my other act space is all we have. And sometimes, occasionally, I freelance. With the studio stuff, I do mixing, mastering, and although I don't delve too much into the recording side of things, usually producing most of the songs that come my way. And with live sound, done a few gigs with some artists out there in the country. And yeah, to name a few, that would be like Marty Friedman, Divine, When Chai Met Toast, The Downtrodens, and stuff.
Nice.
Akash has a few of those for himself as well.
Yeah.
He's Sanjay Thapre. He mixes my band Pineapple Express, which is something we'd be very interested to talk about in the following few minutes as well. Brother V, Takara, that's Akash.
Yeah, that's nice. So one of the reasons I wanted to speak to you guys today for this episode is
and Chris Adler. I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
Akash mixed Chris Adler as well. So yeah.
Oh yeah, I had the pleasant experience of playing with him.
Just missed that out. So one of the reasons I want to speak to you guys for this episode is because you guys are in both worlds, on both sides of this whole thing. So you guys work as engineers, mixing engineers, recording engineers, and also are musicians. So this is one of the reasons I wanted to speak to you guys so that you guys can kind of talk about both the sides and your experience playing with multiple bands and handling duties on both these sides as engineers and musicians. So we'll get into those topics as we start. And but as a starting point, actually I wanted to talk about your background first. Like, what did you guys study audio? Did you guys go to university for audio or some kind of a course related to audio? Just as a starting point so that people have a reference as to what is the best way to get into this field, the audio field.
All right. Okay. So it all started when I was 15. Between the ages of 14 and 15, I took part in a reality show called Saregama Lil Champs, which I won. And during that, I think the biggest takeaway for me instead of being the winner there was the fact that I discovered a software called FL Studio, because one of my competitors showed me FL Studio. He's like, okay, there's this great software, just download it, and I think you'll find great use for it. So I did, and that kickstarted something that I hadn't imagined in my wildest dreams, because I didn't know something like that existed. So my first ever exposure to some audio related, the nerd stuff was when I was in 6th standard. I started working on a software called Pro Tools 6 LE, which was something my dad was using to record my mom's Veena. So I come from a heavily musical background on mom's side. And some of the brains have come from dad's side, thankfully. Imagine that otherwise. So first ever exposure was Pro Tools, but I realized there wasn't much you could do musically with it. It was mainly for recording, editing, mixing, and all of that. So when it came to creating music, so I discovered FL Studio when I was 15, and from there, from I think FL Studio 7, right now we're at FL Studio 20. I've taken that journey with that software, growing with it and discovering stuff mostly on my own. And every time I got stuck, there was YouTube to help. I haven't studied audio, but when it came to music, I learned Carnatic music till when I was about in 2nd or 3rd standard. Mom taught me Carnatic music. My grandpa was an Asthana Vidvamsa at the king of Mysore's court. Asthana Vidvamsa is basically the main musician in the court of the king. Okay. So it all comes down from there, and my mom wanted to have me continue that, and I'm kind of grateful that that's a foundation that I got with audio.
So you studied classical. Sorry, so you studied classical music till
when I was about in 2nd or 3rd standard, and it started off when I was like 4 or 5 years old.
All right. Okay.
Probably a little longer as well. That's Carnatic music, and when I was in 6th standard, I started learning Hindustani classical music from Pandit Anand Bhagwat.
Okay.
So I've been educated in both forms of Indian classical music for vocals. That I continued till when I was about in 9th standard, and I stopped that because everything I've learned at a point of time when I figured out that I'm becoming too much like the teacher or something like that, it just hit me, and I've taken a step back. Thankfully enough, though, in that much amount of time, the concepts and the foundation that I've got were really strong, and I have to be grateful for that. So I advocate firmly for the fact that Indian music is an incredibly strong
of course
foundation educationally speaking. Yeah, with audio I haven't had any education. I just tinkered. It's just that over the years all those mistakes just started being more and more evident as my ears started getting better. It was just a matter of sheer time. That's about it. I think time just did that, and continuous exposure to audio. That's about it.
All right. Akash?
Awesome. How do I follow that?
With actual education, da.
Yeah. So I started out as a guitarist first. So that's where my journey began. And I started, picked up the guitar in high school, and I never had any education musically. I've never studied music professionally. So it's just started out as a YouTube thing back when YouTube began. So it was just watching videos, trying to learn things by ear, or just watching concerts or instructional DVDs and stuff like that. So that's pretty much how I got into the music side of things. There was no sort of a family background with music. So, but everybody were music lovers. So there always used to be, classic rock albums playing at home, from because of my dad. He has a huge collection of music from back then. So both pop and classic rock and classical music, Western classical music, that is, and just playing. So it always used to be there somewhere in the background, in my head. So once I picked up the guitar, it sort of all started making sense, and sort of pushed me more towards music and the audio side of things. Actually, so the guitar was sort of like a gateway drug into audio, I guess.
Yeah.
And so after that, I was in my engineering when I was performing in multiple places, or competitions, and in the local circuit. And when I started seeing that, okay, there may be like a possibility I could do something with this, I met like a couple of people in my life who at the time were studying audio engineering, and who became really good friends at the time. And I figured out that this is a viable option that there is. And till then, I had no idea that this was like a profession on its own. Zero clue about any of this. So once I knew that, I was like, okay, I can maybe give this a shot. So I dropped out of engineering during that time and went to study audio engineering. However, just to put the point that official education in audio engineering is not necessary. I know, case in point with Yogi, to be able to do this for a living. But personally, for me, it was not just about the education side of it, but the whole experience of so I studied at SAE London in the UK. So there, the whole experience of living there, getting the exposure to a completely different lifestyle where people come from, not only like musically, but personally in their life, how they look at things both professionally and day-to-day life. I think that sort of changed my entire view of life in general. So that really completely changed the trajectory of my life from there. So I would say that it is important in that aspect, and getting to meet people from different I would say professions, who were like 40 years old, who were 50 years old, who were studying in the same class as me. And then there were people who had just gotten out of like 10th grade, who were there right next to me as well. And I think that was a bit of an eye opener into seeing like how things work abroad, and compared to like sort of in our own circle here that we're just generally used to always looking at. So I think that really helped me a great deal. And once I finished my course there, I got back here and opened up a small home recording studio at the time, before I opened up this studio here, the professional setup right now. So just took it from there. This is 2012, and I've been doing it ever since.
Nice. So the reason I asked that question is now it's convenient that one of you didn't study audio and one of you studied audio. So that itself is an example of, like you said, you don't really need to study audio to get into this field. All you need is curiosity and the patience. Yes,
Definitely, because if you're not studying, I think it boils down to how much patience you have. How long can you go without getting actual results, because you're still going to be exploring, figuring stuff out, and that takes time if you're doing it on your own. Education is more like you're being given it and you're paying for it, and then since you're doing that also, that's another factor that'll make you actually work towards getting results better. And like Akash said, the exposure to so many beautiful things, and I'm sure like incredible professors as well, who are already excellent at what they do as well.
So exactly, the point of reference there was unbelievable. I mean, even like a couple of the faculty that we had worked with like really big artists and guitarists or famous pop stars from the community there, and these guys were teaching us from all the experience that they had. So we had a great reference point in that aspect. But also the other flip side to studying professional audio would be when you're in an environment like this. In my particular case, all the students that were there in my class were all professionally trained musicians at that, because the level of education that happens in other countries is very different, to what, let's say, happens here, where music is a mandatory course there. So everybody are like extremely well trained musically, and the ears are extremely well trained to that point. So it really pushed me to sort of get on it and start working towards more. So as they say, it's always the more you involve yourselves with people who are at a much higher level of maybe work ethic or professionalism or general knowledge, that we also sort of, it rubs off on us as well, and wants us to like work harder for it. So that's the other flip side to it.
So again, like I said, if you want to get into audio, it's not necessary to you'll have to make a decision. If you're paying money to study audio, obviously you have that responsibility of wherever we're getting the money from, you have to pay that back, all of that, and make sure that you're making the best of that course, and making sure that you're planning to pursue this and not just doing this on a whim. So that's one thing, because it's a huge responsibility paying that amount of money for any course. And if you're not studying audio, then you need just patience and curiosity to do this.
In my case, I put myself in a similar spot by dropping out of college. Right? So I didn't have the luxury of taking it easy or taking it for granted.
Yeah.
So it was do or die. It still is do or die every
Yeah.
single day.
Yeah, of
I
course.
don't make progress. It's basically a hit on my life.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
this whole career choice is do or die. Like, there's no, I don't think any of us wake up on any day and be like, yeah, I'm just gonna chill today and do nothing.
Yeah.
So
no. I wake up like that a lot of times, but then I can't.
then you can't. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's good to keep, vacation days and all of that. But at this stage, I don't think any of us have that. Have the luxury to do that. So let's talk about audio education for musicians, and to what extent you think it's important for musicians to have audio education of some sort, at least before coming to the studio, during the songwriting process and all of that. So from our experiences, so let's talk about that. If
It's interesting because I'm sure we can find a ton of artists in the world who probably have nothing to do
nothing to, yeah.
audio education and
Mhm.
are probably still selling a million records.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's very important. I would say it's convenient to have a language to speak to convey your ideas better, or to organize and come up with ideas in a more orderly fashion.
So when I say audio education, doesn't mean you're studying audio in any form, but it's just
Yeah,
some
because-
form of just curiosity in audio, and just trying out stuff by yourself.
Oh wait, you're talking about audio education for musicians or musical education for musicians?
No, I'm talking about having a basic knowledge of recording yourself,
Okay.
recording
I would
recording an
say
instrument
in
and all of that.
2021 that would be like a very necessary skill to
Yeah,
have.
so
on some level.
that's it. Tipped the scale.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. What about Akash? What does Akash think?
Exactly the same. I'll talk a slightly different aspect of the education. Just the basic know-how about how things work. Just to have an idea before you start writing, or before you start producing, or attempting to go to a studio, to know how the whole that game works in
Yeah.
terms of what you need to be ready with, or what you need to expect before entering into a studio, or what the whole process is like.
Yeah.
It may be the process wise, it may be monetary wise, it may be everything, just to have a basic. I think right now there is no like excuse for someone to not have that, or even like a basic knowledge of recording yourselves, or because everything is so accessible, there's knowledge all over the place. There's literally no need to ask anyone.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's any excuse for anyone to not have that basic knowledge. But for
Yeah.
people who are looking for it, I think yes, you need to look into the basics of a studio, what you need to be prepared with before getting into a studio, before you approach an engineer, or before even thinking about going ahead with producing your record or your music.
Yeah, so that's what I was talking about as a starting point for in your songwriting process. So it helps you come up with kind of organize your ideas, like Yogi said, organize your ideas in a better way. You get more ideas also while writing your song by by using different kinds of tools, and experimenting with different kinds of tools. You get more ideas for your song, and also you at least know what is good and what is bad. And when you go to a studio and you hire someone, you know that this is what he's trying to do, and this is what he's trying to achieve, and you're not like sitting there just lost and
Exactly.
trying to think like, okay, I don't know what this guy's doing. But I don't think that's a good way of going about. You're hiring someone to record or mix your album, which is your brainchild, and you can't be lost about that entire process. So at least
You're
as a
lost.
starting,
If you're lost, you have like 100% trust in the guy you're working with.
yeah,
Because-
or have an infinite budget, one of them.
Yeah, true. It would simply be foolish to not know how to do certain things on your own, and explore that side of things. Otherwise, you're just going to lag behind, and then no one wants to stay behind the competition. So
It basically
that would be
will
my
take double or triple the time that other artists take. And
for
you
sure.
you want to put out music as soon as possible, especially in this day and age. You're competing with, I don't know, millions of musicians. So
For sure.
you just want to put out music as soon as possible in the most efficient manner,
Yeah.
and with the right set of people. So I think that brings us into also finding the right person for the job, in terms of your engineer, or even someone doing the marketing for your album, or all of that. But it all starts with hiring an engineer. so that someone records and mixes and all of that.
It sort of links in with the previous topic that we were discussing as well about people having the awareness of both studio and who they're working with. So I think just a basic knowledge of what your music needs, and before approaching someone, just going through their body of work to see what they have done or the kind of music that they have done, whether or not, I mean, a particular engineer might be great at one thing, but he may not be so great, or like I'm sure he'll do a good job at a certain thing, but he may not be able to give you the best at that particular thing, which you may require. So I think this is something which is really important for artists to do their homework before meeting someone, or just meet your engineers, go through their body of work and speak to them about what they want. And communication, I think this is something which every engineer faces at some point, a lack of communication. I think this is an issue with a lot of artists who are starting out. So I think the basic thing of just hitting up your engineers or other artists, speaking to them about your requirements, and trying to see if it's a right fit. Personally, I feel the work side of it always comes secondary. Personally, for me, the personal chemistry always comes first. If I am not comfortable working with a certain person, he may be the greatest musician of all time, a greatest engineer, it could be whatever. I would not be putting myself in that place, or I would not be able to give my 100% in that space. This could be just a personal thing. I just wanted to mention that. So I think that's also a really good thing to look upon for artists, where they need to click personally on a personal level as well, have the similar views at least, and gel together to be able to spend a good 3 weeks, 4 weeks, or a couple months at a time with this person in the studio making a record.
Not being an ass really pays off sometimes.
Always pays off.
There are times when you have worked with a person, probably like an incredible musician or really good at what they do, whether it's an engineer or a musician. Since I can speak for both sides of this, you will finish that body of work and you probably will get a great result. You just won't be working with that person again.
Correct.
I mean, it's fine. You life does put you in situations where you will not always be around the people you like, but I think it's not going to happen again.
Each mix engineer or recording engineer has a different style of working, has a different workflow. So just experimenting with different workflows and finding the right person that fits your workflow and your working process and writing process is also one reason that you need to do your research and find out what this person is good at, what this person is good at, and then kind of compare the two. I would highly suggest, I mean, I've seen bands do this. They look at names and they go for that, like especially international names, which I really don't get the point of that. There are like tons of engineers in your own country. Why would you not hire engineers in your own country? Because bands from abroad, like say a musician from the US, would rather hire an engineer from the US or from their city, actually. So I don't know why we kind of have this problem of having an outside name, and that might sound cool on the album, because some people do it for just that,
exactly,
and not for anything else.
Well, I think it also boils down to the fact that if you're hiring some international name, you probably heard their music, and in your head, you think that if you give it to that person, you're going to sound like them, and it couldn't
far from the truth.
From the truth, because
you're nothing like that band.
You're going. You said you start off with hiring that engineer for a task. I would say take a step back. You start off with the music itself. Like, I think it boils down to how good your music is and what's going on in that song. If it's not a great song, no engineer's ever going to be able to fix it anyway. So
correct. And you'd rather actually like work with a local producer or a local engineer from the scratch and get it up to, like, even if you really wish to give it to a certain engineer abroad or whatever, at least make sure the material is worthy of it, or it's it's up to the point where somebody can do a good job with it at the end of the day. And personally, like as I mentioned earlier, the personal chemistry always plays into a record making process. It may be a single, it may be a record, whatever it may be. I think that really plays a huge part, having the person right in front of you or with you, working with you, compared to like working on an email or something, on an email chain.
Also talk about other things other than music. You can talk about how much this person charges versus the other person charges, but what is this guy offering that the other guy isn't offering, and does the price justify itself? Look at his body of work. People have websites and portfolios for a reason. So go check it out, do your research. All these things can't be spoon fed to everyone, and you can't, and no one is going to mix and record your album for uh, nothing. Especially if we have a body of work behind us, we know how much effort it takes to make a good sounding album. Let's talk about like studio practices that musicians have to take care of, and also the importance of the pre-production stage before that. How much time should be put into the songwriting process before getting into the studio, and then what we should take care of after stepping into the studio as musicians.
Yeah, I mean, connecting it with the previous topic of what artists should know about before getting into the studio.
Yeah.
Once you have a basic idea of what the process is like, ideally your engineer, whoever you hire, would sit you down and explain you through, okay, this is what all we're going to have to do. This is how much time it's going to take. So we need to schedule time based upon that. I think the first, generally, like, I'm just going to speak for myself at the moment in terms of the process wherein, if a band approaches me for a single or a record, I will first, discuss their music, ask them to send their demos. First, once I get an idea of what they sound like, I will make an appointment or schedule a jam with them, and go and sit in on their entire jam and listen to how they sound as a band. And just to add in a point here wherein my forte is sort of capturing a band's live performance rather than the post-production side of things. So for me, I mean, I look at that would be the first thing that I look at. How good are you as a band on its own without all the glitz and glamour of the post-production and polishing later on? How good are you in the room with 4 or 5 people in the room? What magic can you bring out right there? And I make points right away of what USP this band has. It may be the singer, it may be the guitarist, it may be the drummer, who's bringing something to the table that that we can really embellish upon later in the post production process. So I would personally, I would make write down all these points and listen to the songs that they're doing on the album, and make points of those as well. If there are some strong points or if there are negatives in the song, again, purely from my perspective, they are willing to take. If it's to them whether they want to take the points or not. But I will make a point to mention it to them, saying that if you can work these out, you can change this, you can cut this out, you can make this section maybe better, both in the aspect of sound sonically to make it sound better, and also, as I said earlier, just to help them realize a more marketable product as well. Because at the end of the day, you're not only making music for yourself, you're also, I mean, the people are going to be random people are going to be listening to it, so it needs to catch their attention as well. And generally, pre-production generally means having scratch tracks of all the songs ready, where we already have like a good structure of the song with us, and we know what every person is going to play, and they're already, for example, the tempo of your song, the time signatures of your song, to fix, because some people may overlook this, but a small thing as tempo can make or break your song. Sometimes just increasing a tempo or decreasing a tempo can increase the energy, or decrease the energy, or make it hit better for that song. So I think working with your engineer or producer and figuring this out would be like a big step in the pre-production step. And doing your scratch tracks and having it ready before you get into the final recording phase, I think would be like my way of going about it.
Mine's extremely different compared to what Akash's workflow is. For me, when it's a studio product, nothing really matters. Like at the end of the day, all I care about is what goes on Spotify or what goes up on YouTube. Like,
correct,
you could probably utterly suck as a band and it still wouldn't matter to me, in the sense that I will get the best possible source from you, edit the crap out of it, and like get an as embellished product from it as possible. And before doing that, again, it's something that I'll have to talk to my client about. What's your vision? Is this what you're going for? Because this is where my skills will shine. Like I can make that happen for you guys. I can bring that to the table, and like Akash said, help them out with changes in the song, arrangement wise, production wise, add and remove elements. I usually like having that freedom. When a client comes to me and says, okay, this is our song, my outlook towards it is what is the best possible, most listenable, most addictive product that I can get from this. All right. Or even if there is not enough happening already, if I can bring my skills onto the table and make that happen, like add stuff or delete stuff, and if I'm given the freedom to do that, then regardless of what it is, I'm going to end up with a product that sells. That's basically how I look at it. And then obviously the band themselves, if it's a band, will probably have a lot of work to do, in which case I give them pointers. And sometimes I don't even, I look at it like, you've probably got guitars in the band, all right, and the song or that section probably doesn't require guitars. And I don't believe in the concept where, since this band has to sound like this live, so I'll have to add a guitar section over here, or like you utilize what's there in the band. So I don't believe in any of that, like break every single rule, no rules at all. So if there's guitars, I can probably have a hip hop section going on. Maybe you figure out a way to do it live. But if that song and that section calls for it, I would love to, do actual justice to that, and get that out to the listeners. And at the end of the day, in a way, it kind of pays off, because if your listeners are hooked and your monthly count is increasing and all of that, and you finally draw a crowd to your shows or whatever, where you can make income out of it and all of that. And when that's the case, when you've got a fan base coming in for you, they will actually not mind hearing your live version, or a different take towards that song, since they're already going to go home and spin that song again, which is what we've produced in the studio without those rules.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my approach to it.
So this is a nice way of looking at this, because all of us have different workflows and styles of working, and some of us like working in this way, some of us don't like to work in this way. For example, I am somewhere in between both of you guys in terms of the workflow. Like I love live instruments, but fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of bands are not well versed with playing the drums live. They're not very experienced at it, and when they tell me that we want to record live drums, I ask them just one question: have you recorded live drums in the studio before? If yes, good, we can move ahead with that. If no, then I don't want you to even try, because it'll suck. If you haven't recorded in a studio, there is no way it's going to sound good, so you would rather program it. And so hopefully the band knows how to program and they program it. If not, I program it for them. But I would always prefer live drums any day, because that gives you a unique sound, because program drums come from softwares, and a lot of people use that software, and ultimately you're just going to sound like another artist, because there's only so much you can change that sample. So the best way to sound unique is to work with live instruments. And if you want to record any live instrument, even if it's a guitar, the only way to record guitar is by playing it and being good at playing the guitar. Same with live drums. If you don't know how to play drums, then, or if you're not practiced enough in a studio environment especially, it's a whole different like ball game altogether. So if you don't have experience in that, I would rather work with programmed drums. The rest of the instruments, I don't really if it's guitar, bass, obviously it has to be played.
Speaking to the wrong person there.
For me at least, I mean, that's what sounds real to me. Again, we all, like we just mentioned, everyone has different workflows.
Correct.
And no one is trying to step on to each other's workflows. Everyone has a styles, and people come to us for those styles. So
Akash just stepped on me, da. All right.
that's okay. That's not a problem.
Just to quickly chime in, I mean, again, with respect to all the different workflows and everything, with respect to what you mentioned as well, if you approach a drummer and he hasn't recorded prior, this is something obviously I've faced as well. I think it's a bit of I see it as a bit of our responsibility, both as producers and engineers, to educate them about this process. Again, this just like my view, but to work with them, to get them up and work them up to a point where they are able to record in the studio. Because I think your true salt, as a musician, sort of comes out always when you're in an isolated space in a studio. And I think it's sort of our responsibility to be able to give them a platform and, train them, sometimes almost train them to a point where, they should be able to do this again for their next record. It shouldn't and this is just a quick reason as to why I do not go down that path. The next record, either they come to me or go to somebody else. They shouldn't be in the same space as they are right now and still not be able to play. Because as obviously, when I started out, I didn't have the luxury of my own space, and I couldn't record live instruments. So I did the exact same thing. Though I did not program things myself, I worked with other producers to get things programmed, and lot of times by Yogi as well. And when I did the final product, obviously, like we got it, all produced and polished to a point where it sounds good. But when the artist goes live, this is where a lot of artists fall flat on their faces, and this is an unfortunate truth, wherein they can't match up to, not in terms of the exact sound of the record, but the quality of performance on the record. And this happens a lot. So just a reason as to why I take it as a responsibility to not let that happen for the artists when they go live and face the harsh reality that, oh wait, it's not happening, or the crowd comes into your show and they're like, wait, this doesn't sound, they don't sound half as good as their record, what's happening here? And this happens a lot.
But don't you think they'll come back to you because you made them sound way better than...
I would much rather have them sound better the next time than
Akash being nice Akash as usual.
Yeah, I think he's going way above and beyond his actual duties over here.
No, it's not about. I agree with Akash. The only thing is, people are not willing to take that help.
Exactly. Yeah.
I do the same thing. I'm willing to offer. I'm willing to help them. The problem is most of the bands are not willing to take that help.
Yeah,
and we are not doing this for. We are not running a charity here. Okay,
Yes,
so if you want to take that help, there's something that comes with it. Okay, I will do everything it takes to make you sound good, and it is my responsibility as your hired engineer to make you sound good. But
Correct.
I'm not running a charity here. If you're not willing to take that responsibility up of hiring me to help you out, then I can't help you.
Yeah,
Because
step one is definitely the artist. They need to be
Yeah.
willing to collaborate and be open to the idea of learning. If they're not willing to do that, obviously we can do much beyond that. So
that's the reason I tell them, because if your if your budget is 500 rupees, then what are you going to do? What album will you
that's
do?
where Akash's approach really comes into play. You sit in on the band's jam, and that's where most of my pre-production happens with the band. Like I usually invite them over to my place. We've got everything set up. I make them perform the song live, all right? And then I see, like, okay, is it going to make sense for this drummer to track live? If not, there are nice ways to break it to them, and more often than not, they understand.
I would love to work with live instruments any day.
Correct.
I mean, it's a challenge. It's a challenge for me, and it gives me
You
an
already do,
opportunity.
right? With Mishram, you mix mridangam and all of that. So it's pretty cool.
And that album is mostly live, right? I think just the drums were not recorded live on that.
Drums aren't, but the rest of it is
All completely.
yeah.
You
So,
can tell. It's live, yeah.
the best results I've got is when the artist's vision matches my vision. Like,
100%.
so if my vision is here and the artist's vision is here, they're like, yeah, whatever happens, it's fine. We'll just mix it, bro.
Can't deal with mediocrity, dude.
Yeah. So I need to bring it here. So if you're not willing to go above that mediocre level, then then for you also as an engineer, it's like, they are not interested. Then why am I doing this? But then I still can't just leave it there. Like I have to just do that extra bit to just bring it up.
I feel you.
Yeah. But it helps if the artist also is encouraged and more curious to try out different things along with the engineer.
I think that's not even that shouldn't really be an option as well. In terms of for the artist, it's their product, it's their baby.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, if they themselves couldn't be, less bothered, then I don't know what to say there.
So other than being studio engineers, all of us are also live sound engineers, or mostly FOH engineers. Let's talk about the live sound part of things. Like it's almost very similar things that we will be talking about, but this is in terms of, you have to keep in mind you're working along with an engineer that is going to be touring with you, traveling with you. You're going to be spending a lot of time together, not in your house. So you want to talk about your live sound escapades?
Go for it.
Okay. The first time I ended up, believe it or not, I mean, for people who are listening, some engineers who might be listening to this, my first ever show, I think, was at a huge festival with about 4,000 people and an SE48 in front of me. And I had zero clue about how to use it. Zero clue about what tuning the system was. Absolutely nothing. So I think I fell flat on my face multiple times like that, but I think it was because of that. And the one time that I actually felt, got it right, and I felt that power of the PA, there was no turning back after that. And I think that's something, I think all of us can agree on that. The power you feel as a front of house engineer with
The best,
Yeah.
with
the best
like
feeling ever. You feel
You're
like
so in command, but no one is looking at you and no one gives a shit about you.
best.
we're in the perfect
Yeah,
situation possible.
Yeah.
And to be able to control the emotions of about a couple thousand people is absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
And to be able to make sure the 8 to 10 people on stage, the musicians on stage, are comfortable as well. I think that's one of the best jobs you can have in the world.
All of their effort, practice, literally boils down to your job at the end of the day. Like, will you make it reach the listeners' ears nicely or not?
Yeah.
And huge responsibility. So yeah, when it pays off, it feels amazing.
For anybody who's looking to get into being a freelance audio engineer or live sound engineer, there are obviously two ways. One is getting into like the rental companies, or working where it's a more of a fixed income and you have job security. And the second one is this, purely getting right in there with the artists, as a producer and as an engineer, tying it in with the studio as well. Where if you work with them from the ground up, you have way more control as an engineer, and the artists feel way more comfortable working with you, because they trust you with the music, because the music in and out, all the parts in and out. And I think that's very important, especially nowadays. It's way more important for the more personalized approach. Starting up with artists who are starting up as well is like the best way. And in my personal case, that has worked wonders for me, where I got to learn, grow along with the artists themselves. And luckily enough for me, the artists also were very patient in terms of me learning and me also growing, and not being just the guy who knows everything initially itself. So they were also patient with me until I got to a point where I could handle things on my own. So I think this is something which happens when you get a good rapport going with the artist as well. So I think that's something very important to note for engineers who want to get into this field at the moment, for live.
Yes. One thing is, I think you'll have to decide studio or live. I think that's a broad way of looking at it. And then after that, if you choose live, then again, like you said, there are two ways of getting into it. Joining like a company, live sound company of some sort, is not, you won't get to the creative side immediately. It'll take a lot of it'll take some time to get to the creative part, and you're going to do a lot of the other stuff that's associated with live sound, setting up speakers, carrying the speakers, even like all of that. And that's I've done that as part of the Audio Academy training. Niranjan Shivaram, like he used to take us to the shows, and he used to just we used to go in a truck, just load up the gear, set up the entire thing there, like carry it on our own, set it up there, do all those measurements and all of that. And I did this, it was part of the course, obviously, so I had to do it. But after the course, I just started doing exactly what you said, like just working with bands. And some of them I started with as they also started growing, and all of that. And because of which, so I know that I'm not the technical kind of guy, and I can never, I think, become a systems engineer. I don't think I can ever reach that stage. Like you have a basic understanding of all of those, but I don't think I can ever do it as a like full-time thing. So I want to mix bands, and the only way to do that is work with more and more bands, and mix and make mistakes, and that comes with any creative job, but especially this.
I mean, I don't think we're at a point right now, like nothing really will shock us at this point. We're like, okay, sure, we can somehow figure this out. We're at that point because of all the things we faced. And I think this is something important for everybody to know who are planning to get in, or like new engineers who are starting out, is that, go through the phase, even what Yogi was talking about, just being there, wrapping cables, setting up the kit. If you haven't gone through that, and if you feel you're privileged enough to just get in there, and there's a very particular reason why in rental companies, they don't let you on the board right away.
Yeah.
You need to learn that respect for the job, and, for the people who do what they do. And as mix engineers, we are extremely, as Yogi mentioned earlier, we have the easiest job there. And we're very privileged to be doing what we're doing there. So we need to make sure that we have the gratitude to people who are working for us. And sometimes if they are not up to the job, we just have to get our hands dirty and do it ourselves. But I think if for everyone, they need to go through that phase, do that, and only then get to get to the board and start enjoying that side of it. I think that's really, really important to understand.
Again, it also depends on the kind of artist you're working with. If you're, say,
I was
mixing
coming to that.
pop artist and things aren't in place, you can't get your hands dirty in some situations. So you will have to school them and say, okay, this is how I need it, and you got to get it done. I mean, there are places where you can do that, but that isn't all the time at all.
Yeah, all of us, like I think we mentioned before, all of us have different ways of working. So how do you guys prepare for a show before?
Oh shit! Yeah, this was what we were discussing, the lead up to the show. Okay.
Yeah, correct. So I mean, we can talk about Pineapple Express since I handle sound for them and Yogi plays for them.
Yeah, artist, engineer.
Yeah. So it'll be great. Just run through like what we usually do. So in my particular case, especially with the current lineup that Pineapple Express has, everybody, all the members are either engineers themselves, producers themselves, music directors, composers, really well-established artists, all of them. So my job becomes that much more easier here, compared to like even when I first started out with Pineapple Express, when everybody was still sort of learning, and it was a different lineup back then. So I as I had explained earlier, we used to sit together during jam sessions, make sure everything is fixed in the jam session before we get to the stage, meaning both from the performance point of view, from the technical internal band setup point of view, from all the tones. It may be because I mean, I'm guessing nowadays everyone uses digital processors for almost everything. Very rarely do people use amps anymore, and so set up the tones perfectly so that we don't have issues with that. But in my situation, again, very privileged situation, these guys know exactly what they want and what things should sound like. So I really don't need to do anything in terms of a pre-preparation with Pineapple Express, as opposed to like other artists that I'm working with at the moment.
But we also have a very dark history of the bad days of bad sounding.
Yeah, 100%. We've come from that. I mean, we've gone through those phases, and we worked together to try and get it, as best as we could at the time. But I think now, as I mentioned, it's like everybody in the band are at a level where they know exactly what to do and how things should sound. So my job becomes just representing it, or portraying the entire band's image as to what they're giving me in an enhanced manner. Not really fixing things at the moment. Earlier, it used to be trying to fix things during the show, or fix things to make things sound okay or sound good. Now it's like we already have something which sounds great. I just need to really polish it and make it and not screw up, basically. That's my job at the moment.
Whenever we've got new songs, right? We do them during sound check, and we like nitpick on the details. And even in spite of doing that, it's not guaranteed that it's going to go great in the show, because Akash then makes a few pointers and gives us those pointers after the show as well. So every show, we're constantly trying to evolve that through the feedback that I receive from Akash, since he's the guy who's going to be listening to everything from the perfect spot. So it's a constant back and forth, and usually every show till now, probably every single show, we've done a lot of shows, and every single show has had some kind of a change in my a Logic project. So constantly trying to improve. Just that hunger to get better and better is inherently there within us, and that's something that I would expect for anyone who's got any ounce of wanting to make it through in this industry. I think that's got to be a certain default over there in everyone to get anywhere near success.
These are the things that we tend to follow leading up to a show, but still for the more important part of it comes much later. This is purely from the band and the engineer's perspective, but I think once we're done here, the next step, the band's manager who's there gets in touch with me regarding the point of contact for the show, for that particular show. And this may be sometimes the client themselves or the event manager, or sometimes there would be a middleman between these two, who's handling the communications for them. So I take it up from here, by sending across all the tech details and the requirements to them. And this is where the actual work starts. Going back and forth between, so the chain of command generally happens being the client who hires us. Client also hires an event company, and this event company then again hires a sound vendor who will be providing all the gear for the event. So there's a huge chain of command wherein things need to be run through, like all of them, and everybody needs to accept to the things that we are asking for, and vice versa as well. So this gets really tricky, as you can imagine. There are three sets of
You don't get everything you ask for, basically, nowhere.
most of the time we
Not
don't.
ideal.
Obviously the manager does the first bit of it about dealing with all the logistics and all that sort of stuff, but he hands over the tech to me once he sends across all the rider details. So I will get the call first from the event company saying that, okay, we have all of this, okay, fine, we're going to send it to a certain vendor and see if we're able to provide all of this in the first place. Then if and only that, when they're like, okay, the budgets get approved and they're like, okay, we can provide all of this, then they start searching for a sound vendor who has these things. And then the sound vendor gets in touch with me, saying that, okay, these are the things we can provide from the rider, these are the things we cannot provide from the rider. So then we it doesn't happen too often, but we generally get most of it, but within the context of that, there are like small things that can go wrong, which they don't really mention to us. That's the fun part. Which we get surprised when we get to the stage and we're like, okay, we just have to deal with it. So I think this is the most important part of it, because this is not only about I think for me, I'm just going to chime in here just from a personal perspective, where this made me grow so much, both as a person, as an engineer, and somebody who takes responsibility for a group of people. Because we're at the end of the day, we're not really just an engineer. We are looking for the betterment of the brand. We are representing the brand at the end.
An extension of the artist itself.
Exactly. And nobody has met the band up till now, right? I'm the first, the manager is the first point of contact. I'm the second point of contact. So anything I say or do will directly impact the band or the
image,
band right before they even meet them. So I need to be very careful, or generally whoever is in that position needs to be very careful in the way they speak, in the way they present themselves, from the way they they dress themselves to the way they address the client. It's extremely important. I mean, these things may seem very trivial, but trust me, they play a huge role in the final the brand image at the end of the day. So all of this, communicating with them to get all our necessities sorted, and always there are going to be compromises. So we need to be, this is where having a chemistry with the artist comes into play, where I can openly call the band right away and tell them, okay guys, see, listen, this is the situation. Unfortunately, so things are not available. Can we somehow manage for the show without them? And sometimes there are things obviously we cannot manage with, and some things we can say, okay, fine, for the show, let's just go ahead with it. It's not a problem. And on my end as well, as a my necessity, sometimes I have to give up. I'm like, okay, fine, it's not available, let's adjust with what we have and go ahead with the show. So I think this is extremely important. This sort of takes a backseat when when that personal connection or chemistry is not there with the artist. There are so many people involved. It's like a battle of the egos that's happening. I mean, it's common. It's just common. There are like 10 people in the band. There's a manager, there's an engineer, there's a client of like 3-4 people, there's an event company, and there's a vendor. There are egos going haywire all of this place, and our job is to sort of satisfy everyone's ego and not let our own pride sort of get in the way of doing business. I think this is the biggest thing.
At the times where there are middlemen involved, so you actually aren't in touch. You're in touch with so many more people than you need to be.
Well. Which we don't know about, which they don't really divulge initially. So
it's not very transparent in this business, right? Because everyone's trying to make some money off in the middle.
And
you can't even blame them, because that's what they do. But as a result of that, some of the communication that you have done might have actually not reached the vendor, or might have not reached the client. A lot of issues like that. So a lot of surprises in such events.
So in this case, like what Akash was talking about, you're basically you're hired as a sound engineer, but you're almost acting like a mediator between these guys and the band. So and you ultimately you're working for the band. Their experience is the most important for you, but at the same time you cannot disrespect the people from the other side also, because there are certain things that you can't get around. So you'll have to kind of come to a middle point and make sure both of them are.
I'd like to make a change to one of those things. I don't think, as a sound engineer, the band's experience is important, but it's probably not the most important thing. Although you're working for the band, I think the experience of what the audience go through that night at the show, plus what the client feels like, all of those I think will take a step higher than just the experience of the band. You want to make sure that the show is the most important at the end of the day.
Correct. because
all
everybody
around.
has good
You're,
days and
you're
bad
trying
days.
to always strike a balance over here. Basically, the band has to feel good, but then the client has to leave with the best image of the impression of the band. The audience will have to leave with the best impression of the band. Basically, all of these will count towards the band's future itself. Like, better if you do a good job on all of these fronts, you're probably going to get called again.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and that lends itself to a very good segue to because of the differences in the way we work and the different types of clients that you perform for. Uh, you have to kind of keep in mind that they have a certain um, they have called you for a certain reason, and you have to keep that in mind while delivering that performance also. So sometimes you can't always mix according to how you want the band to sound.
See, ideally, the ideal situation is what the band wants to put out there.
Yeah.
Should be firstly in tune with the kind of show they're playing.
Yeah.
And then the engineer will basically be trying to put your image of that out there. And as an engineer, obviously you need to have common sense, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't mix everything like a festival show or a pub show or see
Yeah.
when it becomes what you want, right? Like I don't think I can go as a sound engineer to mix any show thinking, okay, here's what I want this band to sound like. Basically, you're going there to make that band sound ideal in that environment for that audience, right? That essentially becomes an extension of what I want that day.
Yeah.
So once it starts feeling natural, once you don't have an attachment to so many things, and this is something that I keep telling to people, even in terms of just music, do not get attached to ideas. Do not, like, you might have spent 28 days working on this idea, and you still cannot be afraid of throwing it straight into the recycle bin, right? Like the moment you're attached to something that you've done, your judgment is skewed because you're prioritizing ego over like an actual good thing for the product, or in this case the mix. So I wouldn't consider just a single element or two, but the moment you put me in, say, a wedding scenario to mix the same band in, say, a pub, in a festival, in a wedding, or in a corporate show, I think instead of just saying an element or two, I think the whole mix changes its character depending on that. What do you have to say, Akash?
100%. I was just going to mention now, just for people who may not understand what we're talking about, the general three avenues that we have as shows are corporate shows, wedding shows, and public events. Public events meaning outdoor shows, and which is open to public, and your pubs and any local venues. Whereas corporate shows is from a certain corporation or some company who is internally hiring us for their just their employees. And same thing for a wedding, within a wedding environment where we're playing. So these venues greatly differ, and the kind of audiences and what they are looking for out of the show also greatly differs. And in a public event, it's purely us. It's purely us in its complete, uninhibited form, that we can give it to you, and we can represent ourselves in the way we want to. But in a corporate environment and in a wedding environment, we really need to. This is where what we talked about earlier about communicating with the client. This is where it comes in, where we need to really make sure we know exactly what they're looking for, and we sort of fine tune our performance to them. Because if we go and play the kind of show that we would play at a pub or a public venue and go and play it at a wedding or a corporate, they'll throw us out, or either way they'll just get bored and just leave the space.
Your business is, that's for sure.
The audience differs between all of these.
And even with that, I mean, as Yogi was mentioning, it's not about one element or two elements. Wherein the entire way we're looking at the mix itself has to change. Because obviously the kind of power and punch that we look for in a PA, for an outdoor show, or or even in a pub show in a small venue, we'd be generally mixing it twice as loud as we'd be mixing, let's say, at a corporate or a wedding event. So the entire sound itself is different, but as long as we need to read the room and make sure, because something I faced, just a quick thing, something I faced personally is when I've gone to, I don't think this has happened with Pineapple Express, but with other artists, where there are a lot of elderly people in the room. You need to sort of take note of that as an engineer and sort of mix to that room, because if it's a completely young crowd, how they perceive it or what they were, their tolerance levels are much higher to louder music, whereas elderly people, they do not have that tolerance level, and we need to sort of not with somebody coming in telling us, but we need to sort of understand it, by gauging the room and sort of mix to that sometimes. And even though, artists sometimes give us guidelines that this is what needs to be done, you need to make a sound like this. But as Yogi said, as engineers, we need to have our common sense as well and be able to read the room and do things, adapt to things ourselves, in certain situations. To give a good example, one thing I've noticed, I think this is common, you must have noticed as well, what Indian audiences, local audiences in the South like, compared to what audiences in the North like, differs like greatly. And even for that matter, like, foreigners, if it's a foreign, like a delegated corporate event, the way you need to mix there is absolutely different, like to a point where they do not like low end at all. If your sub is on, it's still too loud for them. Sorry, if your sub is off, it's still too loud for them. The sub. So the stuff like this, I think this is something that you end up learning on the job. This is not something they tell you. You just do a show, get screamed at by the client a couple of times, and they're like, okay, wait, last show I did, people enjoyed it, they said they loved the sound, and they praised me at the end of the show, but next show, why am I getting belted by the clients here? This is going to happen. You cannot let your pride or your ego take the first place. The first line of thing is to make sure your audience is happy at the end of the day. That's why you're there. So I think that's very important to
and that's how you'll get called back again to
exactly
do the same show.
Exactly. Yeah.
And even further extension to that is, I don't think this should fall upon the engineer itself. Like when you're playing, say, a corporate show, it again boils down to what music you're playing. No matter what the engineer does, if I'm going to play a metal song, and even if you're trying to tone down everything, make it warmer, less top and heavy, or less bright, less punchy, it's still not going to go through. So I think firstly, more than anything to do with music falls really upon the music itself. And, the kind of
song
that you are giving the engineer to deal with. Firstly, the source, the kind of arrangements going on, your dynamics, the way you're hitting your instruments, the amount of throw you're putting in your vocals, the amount of grit you're putting in your vocals, everything really counts. So firstly, it would be ideal if it didn't have to fall upon the engineer to start, like really taming things. So yeah, it boils down to the music. And one more thing that Akash said, reading the room when there are elderly people. What I believe is that regardless of the room you're in, right, I think there's one thing that a lot of engineers I have noticed do not consider, all right. I think it falls upon us. There is an inherent responsibility that we need to take to make sure that whoever is in our show, right, their ears do not get damaged. All right. I think that's a thing that a lot of engineers do not really pay attention to. They just want, that show to be loud and powerful and crazy. I get it, but there are enough number of ways to do that without having the mix to be insanely harsh and feels like it's loud. You can have a loud mix which doesn't feel like it's loud, regardless of how small the place is. If your musicians are sensible and not banging on the drums like crazy, it's possible to achieve that outcome anywhere. And that's also another reason why I no matter which vendor or which topmost vendor in the country gives me a PA system, I will still tune it to my liking, where I have to make sure that I have a clean slate without any harshness to work with in the first place. Again, why do I do that? Just so everyone can end up going home without ringy ears and have a pleasant experience throughout. So I think personally that's a personal opinion, because I've been at shows where I felt like, dude, fucking stop this, like this is not happening. Why do you need it to be this loud? And again, I'm pretty sure during my early days I would have also been the perpetrator of the same thing. I would have had a couple of loud mixes, but yeah, it what matters is, do you realize that or not eventually? And yeah, I sincerely hope that engineers can pick this up.
So depending on the type of show, I think also your song choices as artists also will differ, right?
Yes.
So
song choices in the way you arrange them, and
the way you arrange, and also your say if it's a pub show and versus a corporate show, the way you arrange your songs and also the songs that you perform for that particular show will differ. So that is, again, like you said, the source. So that is also one part of the source. So the what music the band is performing will help the engineer also kind of make certain decisions. So he knows, okay, this is the kind of event it is.
That's actually a good point. Even with the respect of working closely with artists, because from venue to venue, sonically as an engineer, ideally, if you've done X number of shows, you would know what would sound the best in that space.
Yeah.
Or if there is something that the band is planning to do that for a fact is going to end in disaster purely from a sonic perspective, that you can openly speak to the artist and say that, guys, listen, if there's a possibility to try something else here or choose an alternative, let's please do that. So you need to be at a level with your artist where you can openly discuss with them, at least have a discussion saying that this is the scenario. If you really want to go ahead with this and go for it, let's try it out. But ideally I would suggest against it and try something different. And with Pineapple Express, we do this many times.
I think we've covered most of what I wanted to talk to you guys about, and shall we talk about like some fun stuff?
Yeah, sure.
Let's talk about studio or live sound pet peeves. You want to list out like certain studio pet peeves and live sound pet peeves, if you have any.
Look at Tejas trying to make us lose clients.
I'm going to list out mine also. So
okay,
we'll lose clients together.
We'll start with you.
No, this is an interview with you guys. I'll list out mine last.
I've turned.
Okay, I remember Yogi had quite a few, so go ahead, Yogi.
No, it's not. This is not supposed to be. I mean, this is a learning process, right? So at least artists know what to. This is not things that you have to do.
I was just kidding. I mean, basically, if I'm promised something, and when I reach there, it's not there. It's like basically I get into a point where I'm not going to work with this vendor again.
Yeah.
Like yeah, so that's kind of really annoying. Okay, next Akash. We'll do one by one.
Sure. I'll maybe list one of each, both studio and live. Starting with live, I mean something very similar to what Yogi mentioned as well. Complete transparency. I mean, is appreciated. Anything is fine. You can give me, you can tell me that such and such is not available. We'll give you something else. Great. If you tell me in advance. I hate having surprises at the venue. It may be the worst thing possible, or like one of the most basic things that you could give me that I'm completely happy with if I'm prepared for it. If I reach the venue and I'm like, guys, what's happening here? Where's all the equipment? And they're like, oh, sorry. And this happens all the time because they obviously don't want to ruin the name before. Ruin the show. And also like they don't want to get in bad with the client, much in advance. Obviously, if it happens 2 hours before the show, they can't do anything. They still have to run with the show.
Too late, yeah.
Yeah, so they purposefully do this, and this has happened way too many times. I think that would be one thing for live. I think that's the only thing live. I don't think there's much else that can go wrong there. Second of all, studio wise, I really don't know what would be a pet peeve here. I really honestly don't know. Studio wise, I don't think I've had any and also I could be biased here because I have my own controlled setup. Which I've set up myself, so there's not much that can go wrong here. So, and with the artists is generally, things that could go wrong would be, people coming in unprepared for a session, or people coming in, to a session saying that, when we clearly inform them earlier that, okay, so, you're going to do this, do you want me to come in? Do you want to send me some, reference tracks earlier, or, some rough recordings that you've done so I can tell you if everything is fine before you come in? And they're like, no, we got it. We have everything, down. We'll just come. We need it for 2 hours. We're done. And then they come here and they're like, oh, they start sweating. They're not able to pull things off, and they're not, even prepared with what they want to do. I think that would be something which happens very rarely, at least nowadays, because of everybody has a basic setup at least at home these days, and it's accessible to them. But I think if somebody comes in, especially after we speak to them and give them an opportunity to communicate with us and send us stuff and talk to us about things, they still come in saying that we know what we're doing, and then they don't record or are able to perform at their best. I think that would be my pet peeve, a studio pet peeve.
Nice. You stole mine, but I'll just put it in another way. I'll just put it in another way. Like one is not finalizing the song arrangement before coming to the studio. So if you know that you need to put something before or after the song or those kind of things, then that's you can't change it later. So it's better to do it before the recording process, so that once everything is set, I don't have to move things around. Because the more you move things around, the more possibilities of things going wrong later. So that is one. And then, like you said, performing. If you can't perform your own parts, who can perform it for you? unless I can play that instrument and then I perform it for you. But that's
also
I-
happened. That's also happened.
yeah, that's happened for me also.
Oh yeah,
But
thing that I think we face more and more as well. Sometimes where we need to sort of step in and discreetly
Do magic.
discreetly replace.
I actually have never done that because I feel like I don't know, maybe I feel way too guilty doing that, like when no one is around for some reason. But I do it in front of them.
Okay. Yeah.
So you basically babysit them.
Both has
Huh?
happened. Both has happened.
No, not baby. No, sometimes when they're not able to play those particular parts, I just play it for them. And then live sound cable management, basically one. Second thing, the not marking cables.
Right.
So if the person is not able to tell me which channel is what, it has to be named correctly, and so that my job becomes easier and their job becomes easier, right? It's easier for them. Like if there's a problem, it's easy to identify where the problem is coming from.
Right.
If the cables are named properly. If it's not named, then you're just like it's just gonna guess then.
There are lots of things actually live wise that can go wrong, but I think these are the most.
Akash, can you please move this riser 2 inches?
Yes. There are things. Let's say there are quite a few things live, but I think the most important ones are the ones that we just mentioned.
Any other studio stuff that you want to talk about?
I mean, yeah, okay, yeah. There's one thing. Again, it's a pretty much an extension. Like you may be paying us by the hour, all right? You may be paying me by the hour, but I would still rather be doing something else. Just know that, like, it's not about the money. So if you're going to come unprepared and if you're just going to like waste time, you might still be paying by the hour, but I don't have to take that shit.
Yeah,
that's one of the reasons I pick up the instrument and play it, for them, because you're paying me by the hour. So the more time you take, good for me. But then I there's a limit to how much you can't do 15 takes of the same thing. Like
No, I think I think that would actually be subjective, to the artists themselves, because some people, do have their own workflow, and also like something that we talked about earlier, like artists coming into a new studio space for the first time, they take a while to get sort of
Get used to the monitoring and the environment.
After 10 sessions.
Then yes. Then you need to make a judgment call on that.
No, but even then again, if this is actually a good vocalist and we are still chasing perfection, I will happily comply. Like if you're chasing perfection.
Oh yeah. That's the total. I'm not talking about those kind of things.
In that case, hell yeah, dude, I'm on board.
Yeah. And I would rather do like 10, 15 takes of 10, 15 good takes of different like styles or methods of going about.
You want to have options as well sometimes. So
I want to have options. Yeah. And I don't want to tune. For me, I don't want to tune.
See, I think as engineers and producers, we'd love to try, if the artist is willing to give us better and better takes, and and they are interested in working with us, that way we'd go all day long trying to get better takes and do how many ever takes as possible. I think the issue comes in where they come in unprepared, or they feel that they're doing their best, or they feel that they're giving you the best, but we know for sure that it's nowhere close.
Or 200 smoke breaks.
Oh yeah, exactly. I think it's something very important that they, artists need to sort of respect both the engineer and the studio that they are visiting at that point, and themselves first, their body first of all. To not make sure they don't drink all night and come to the studio the next day with a hangover. Obviously, not going to perform well.
And especially when you're creating an album, I feel like that should be your priority. One thing is you're spending money for it, so do your best with that. Second thing, all your other stuff like vacations, pub outings, drinking, smoking, all of that, do it. I'm not your dad to tell you not to do it, but then when you're making an album, the priority should be to finish the album, because you take forever to finish that one album. If it's 8 to 10 songs, you have to keep some kind of a goal for yourself. I'm going to finish it within this much time. You can't just take like forever to finish that. I know like everyone is not like us who work, are flexible in our work timings and all of that. So a lot of people work corporate jobs, but then I think you'll have to take a call, like how much priority you're giving the album. That is one thing. And then another thing is not being able to play on time, click tracks and all that if you're not comfortable with that. And
Practicing
you don't even need to know how to navigate a DAW for this. You can just practice to a metronome. That's it.
You can practice to a metronome, and it's really easy. Like if a part is too fast for you, start 30-40 BPM and increase 1 BPM every day, and within a month you're good with that part. Like you won't even feel it. You won't even know you did it. It's just going to have happened.
Also, don't set up your guitar tones with creative speakers.
Yeah, please never do that. If a vocalist is doing a good job, and I don't mind tuning vocals, I love tuning vocals in the sense that if you've given me a nice vibe and emotion with that take, I will not make you sing again, even if that pitch is like severely off. Because at the end of the day, we are conveying emotions with our music to the listener, right? We are basically carriers of emotion. We want to make them feel stuff. So if you've given me that kind of emotion and vibe, I will not pester you to sing with that same emotion and vibe with the correct pitch again. I will tune it. And besides, more than anything, for me, the vocalist is just another instrument. A vocal is a sample. Basically, I've created entire vocal lines and guitar lines with pre-existing takes just by messing around with their pitch, their time, and the length and all of that. I love doing that personally. All I expect is that you're respecting the space and not taking it for granted. That's about it. Like you can't be like, oh, this guy will anyway tune it, so I don't have to sing properly. Like if you're coming in with that attitude, then I won't be giving too much of a shit about it.
And I think we spoke about us as engineers gauging the audience in a live sound perspective. In a studio environment, I think we as engineers have to gauge the artist, especially if the artist is talented and knows what he or she is doing. Then we'll have to gauge the artist and work around that so that he or she gives the best performance in the studio. If the vocalist is having like a bad throat or something, just make him a tea or something like that.
Akash does very well. He's got like so many teas, like not just one.
No, I think it's a good point that you mentioned, because I mean, as much as it's just a creative industry, owning a studio or being an engineer at your studio, we're providing a service. It's a service-based industry, and we need to make our clients feel, first of all, welcome, comfortable, happy in their environment, and it boils down all the way from the way you greet them, for the way you treat them, to how cleanly you maintain your studio. Because I think when you're charging a certain amount for something, I mean, you can just put your own, their shoes. If you're renting out a studio, or let's say if you're going to a hotel, you expect that hotel when you go there to be clean, to be comfortable, for everything to be washed, all this, right? So it's the same thing somebody would expect at our studio as well. They also have their own lives. They spend time, they make time out of their thing to come and do something creative. So they shouldn't have to worry about or get irritated with other things when they come into the studio space. So I think that'll be on us to make sure, as you mentioned, to get them to feel comfortable. And secondly of all, as the artist, as you mentioned, not everybody are at the same, who come into the studio are at the same level of musicianship. So we need to gauge as to where they are, and sort of, as long as they are interested in trying to go for it, we need to be there for them to push them into, and not push them in a way that would make them too tense or too sort of too aware of what mistakes they're doing, but sort of get them to go through it very comfortably. Even if it takes 3 hours, 4 hours, whatever it may take, as long as we are not getting annoyed and we are patient with them, they will feel more comfortable to sort of keep going and get the best take out of them. So I think that's a good point that you mentioned. But I think one thing I think that we should also mention is third-party studios, where me as an engineer or a producer and an artist, sometimes we have to go to other studios for whatever reason that we can't record in our own spaces. A lot of studios who are running it purely as a business and not as in-house engineers or producers themselves, I think also need to step up the game with respect to this, because a lot of people are lagging behind, or still stuck in the olden times because of that. If a certain business model was working back then, and they still try to run the same thing even now. So I think that is something when it comes to the pet peeve, they have the gear. I mean, they have like good mics, they have a decent enough room, a decent enough space, but they don't know how to sort of they're looking at it purely as from a business perspective, and I understand it to a certain extent, but as I said, it's a service industry, and we need to they also need to sort of step up their game in terms of how they maintain their studios, both with them in terms of cleanliness, in terms of the quality of gear is there, but if they're not maintained and they're not working right when you need them, what's the point of it? And And also, when you're charging a certain premium for something, you need to make sure you're delivering like 200% of that, not like a bare amount of that. Like, okay, I think I'm charging this much. This is good enough for that.
Mm.
If you're at that level, if you're saying that, I think you're already in the wrong in the wrong step there, right there. So this has happened multiple times, and I think that would be one of my like things that I've faced when I've gone to third party studios, which is why it was like a bigger thing for me to sort of set up my own space so that I can
Yeah.
control it the way I need it to.
I hope that was the two people who are listening get something out of this.
Yeah.
And
If those two also have made it this far.
Yeah.
So yeah, so the whole objective with this is to gain some kind of insight into all the nitty-gritties of what happens within our jobs and how to go about it, and hopefully this gives some kind of insight into that. So
Yeah.
thank you guys for taking the time to do this.
Thank you,
And
first of all. And
awesome, man.
it's always fun nerding about on audio. So
Oh yeah, we'll continue when we
enough time. Yeah.
Thanks for
And,
having us, Tejas.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. I'll see you guys soon.
Cheers, man. Take care.
Bye.